Welcome into PTR, brought to you by Southern Draw. This is episode 2. We are back on the mic talking college football. All we do is talk college football today, college football tomorrow, breakfast, lunch, dinner. We eat, sleep, breathe college football. So let's get right into it. Let's check out the board. So today we got recruiting. I'm gonna buzz over recruiting a little bit, try to be as short as I can with it. Got a lot of updates. This was a big week last week and this past weekend, but as you can see, the board is loaded for today's show. So we got Bye-Bye Hall of Fame, something LSU, Les Miles, some story came out, or not story, a story did come out, but more so the vacating of wins from 2012 to 2015. We got under the radar and top games for 2023, the most overhyped teams for 2023, who those teams may be. Stick around and find out. We got UGA, can they make history this year? And we will rate the Power 5 conferences and who's going to be the new power of the Big 12 once Texas and OU dip for the SEC. All that coming up soon. All right, so let's get into recruiting. First off, this kind of came in late. I had a bunch of stuff ready, but Ohio State popped off, and they are now officially the number 2 recruiting class in the country for 2024 with the addition of 4-star cornerback Bryce West, the number 1 player in Ohio and 4th nationally cornerback. So he is an absolute stud. This was a huge pickup for them, and on top of that, not only did they get him, they landed the 4-star tight end Demarion Witten. This kid is 6'4", 215 from Cleveland as well, another Ohio kid. Great nailing down in state, but I mean, you just got 2 big guys for a really good recruiting class. I mean, they're above Michigan, and they have 6 less recruits. I believe that was their 16th recruit or somewhere in the high teens, but Michigan's at 22, Georgia's at like 23, but also their average player ranking is 3 miles above everyone else's. But still, big weekend for them, so that was huge. Texas Longhorns, they landed Jarrett Gibson. He is the number 2 running back nationally out of IMG, the number 1 running back in Florida. And on top of this, which is what's crazy, last year for the 2023 cycle, they landed the number 1 running back in Florida, CJ Baxter, in the 23 cycle. So this running back room is loaded for this transition to the SEC. That's awesome to see if you are Texas. I mean, that's crazy. That is a huge commit over the weekend, and it was cool. I saw the video. I should be able to find it. I can throw it up here. I believe it was his Instagram story or someone else's Instagram story, but he actually committed with the coaches in the room on his visit. So it was cool to see a kid actually give his word to a staff and actually see it, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, instead of, kids sit at the table, they pick the hats, some kids switch shirts, all that, but see him actually present himself to those coaches and be like, this is where I want to play ball, was really cool. So I was happy to see that. And then Notre Dame actually landed a big commit this weekend. I got to make sure I get his name right. Bronte Johnson. He's an athlete from Fort Wayne, Indiana. He's the number 3 player in Indiana, so great get, obviously in-state, huge. But the reason I really wanted to highlight this, Notre Dame's got like the 6th class nationally, I believe. But I like to highlight, anytime there's a kid like this, I am going to highlight them 11 out of 10 times. After he committed, he said, I want to leave a legacy and stay home. It means more when you homegrown and bring greatness. And like I highlighted that kid going to Mississippi State last week, this is the same thing. I love seeing the mentality in the kids who want to stay where they are or go to the school where they play for pride and play for that sticker on their helmet, not in Notre Dame's case obviously, but for that gold helmet because of how much it means to them. I love that. So I'm very happy to see that, especially for Notre Dame. That was just cool. I love when things like that happen. Those kind of stories are always great. I love that kids like that are still in college football. And also today, something else, Florida, Billy Napier's still on fire. 4-star wide receiver Jeray Hawkins committed to Florida earlier today. Just to throw that in there. Billy Napier's fingers are like flames right now. So now let's get into the deep dive of team. Well, try not to deep dive because I kind of went longer there than I wanted to for those recruits. But we have Tennessee over last week and a little bit into the weekend. They had 3 4-stars commit: interior offensive lineman Max Anderson, Jordan Burns, a linebacker out of Atlanta, Georgia, and Boo Carter, the number 2 player in Tennessee, which now gives Tennessee the top 2 players in the state, adding Carter with the number 1 overall player in Tennessee, Caleb Beasley, the cornerback who committed in October of last year. So that's big for Tennessee. They have now cracked the top 10 nationally for the 2024 classes, sitting at 10. And they actually hosted 3 5-star prospects this past weekend and Elijah Russing, Jordan Ross, who is actually out of Alabama from Vestavia Hills. This kid's an absolute stud. Go watch his tape. You will want him on your team. He is insane. Wiltfong said that he was actually told by him that Tennessee was the one to beat for Ross, and it seems like Florida might be the only other contender. There's still other teams floating around that people are talking, but it's really looking like it's going to be Tennessee and Florida, and then the other 5-star Mike Matthews also visited. So that's a good little recap right there of Tennessee. Little on fire. Heupel's getting it going, and the videos that came out of all the kids visiting were absolutely insane. They had like a whole entrance and everything for the kids' pictures, and I guess their families around him. It was like a little Tennessee concert basically in the locker room for the visit, so that was cool. Now we move on to Texas Tech, sitting at number 23 in the 2024 recruiting rankings in 2024, which, yes, you're like, okay, 23, but it's Texas Tech. Remember, not everyone's on the same level here. So Texas Tech sitting at 23. They actually have 5-star number 8 wide receiver nationally, number 2 player in Texas. Micah Hudson was crystal balled to Tech. Not crystal balled by some random person, by Wiltfong himself. So this is huge. If Texas lands Hudson, you beat out all the big programs in state for a player that literally everybody wants. Joey McGuire is starting to work in Lubbock. This is great to see. And they've actually had 5 4-stars. They had 5 4-stars combined in the 2021, 2022, and 2023 classes. And now Tech already has 4 for this class. And likely the possibility of landing 5-star Micah Hudson, who would be the first 5-star ever for Texas Tech. Yes, they have never had a 5-star recruit. If he committed, who he has been crystal balled by Wiltfong, he would be the first 5-star ever. And this could potentially be one of, if not the best class in the history of Texas Tech. So like I said, Joey McGuire working in Lubbock. Now, we move on to a program that's pretty fun to talk about right now, actually. Penn State, sitting at number 6 in the recruiting rankings for 2024 is the Nittany Lions. They added, over this past weekend, 4-star receiver Josiah Brown, the number 1 player in New York. This kid can fly. Huge pickup. Huge pickup. They also added a 4-star safety in the number 4 player out of New Jersey, Fabio Torre. Tough name to say, yes. But on top of that, they also added 4-star wide receiver and number 3 player in Pennsylvania, Tyseer Denmark, who committing now, Penn State now holds the top 3 commits in the state of Pennsylvania. With Tyseer Denmark, 4-star offensive tackle, Cooper Cousins, and the number 4 athlete nationally, Quentin Martin. So you're absolutely killing it in state. You got the top 3 players in your state. You just got an absolute speedster, number 1 wide receiver out of New York. And then you added a 4-star safety and number 4 player in New Jersey. Penn State, hot. I said Notre Dame was number 6 earlier. I believe Penn State may have flopped with them. So, could be wrong. Now that it just switched when I started recording. But yes, either way, still insane class currently. Now we move on to Matt Rule's Cornhuskers of Nebraska. Nebraska's currently sitting at 19 in the 2024 247 recruiting rankings after adding wide receivers Davon Hall and Isaiah McMorris. The duo are the number 2 and 3 players in the state of Nebraska. And the cool thing about this, you're like, okay, that's crazy. They got number 2 and 3 player, but they're also in the state of Nebraska. But not only did they add the number 2 and number 3 players in the state of Nebraska, they already have the number 4 player in the state of Nebraska on their roster in Elite 11 finalist Daniel Kalen. But the funny thing is, Daniel Kalen is actually this duo of wide receivers quarterback in high school right now at Bellevue West High School in Nebraska. So you got that whole trio from high school playing together, all that chemistry, number 2, 3, and 4 players in the state all coming in. That's crazy. So the quarterback, Daniel Kalen, committed about a month before this duo of wide receivers. And after they committed this past week, he actually said, "It means a lot to me for sure. We already have a great connection, and it will only flourish even more in Lincoln," which I agree. All 3 of these guys being together is huge, especially for Rule early in his Nebraska career, already having chemistry between 3 key players. So that's huge. It shows Rule's nailing down the state, which obviously Nebraska kids, it's kind of like Louisiana. They bleed that. LSU or kids in Louisiana bleed purple and gold. Kids in Nebraska bleed red. We all bleed red, but you know what I mean. Big red, I guess, is what they bleed. But this past weekend, they actually had the number 1 player in the state and the number 7 tight end nationally, Carter Nelson, visited. So that was huge. You would lock down all the top talent in the state, sweep it. And Nelson, coming off his visit this past weekend, actually announced today, just a few hours ago, that he will announce his commitment the 28th, so in 2 days. And the only prediction that he has before this visit was to Georgia, which was via a UGA insider on 247. But we already know Georgia's loaded at the tight end position, and they already have 2 tight ends committed for the 2024 class, one of them being the number 2 tight end in the country. So this was a big past weekend for Matt Rule, and I'm thinking him announcing this commitment date so soon makes me really think it will be in Nebraska. I mean, you announce like 3 days later after you leave, or either, I could be wrong, maybe he went to Nebraska, he's like, nope, this is not it, I want to go to Georgia. But I don't think that's the case just because of how soon this was after. But either way, huge for Nebraska. Go Big Red, I guess. All right, now we move on to bye-bye Hall of Fame, Les Miles, Hall of Fame no more. Yes, Les Miles is now no longer eligible for the College Football Hall of Fame after LSU had to vacate 37 wins. Yes, the penalties stemmed from payments by booster John Paul Funes. He's the former head of Our Lady of the Lake Foundation, and he was the father of a former Tigers offensive lineman, Vidal Alexander, and the payments were technically a recruiting violation that made Vidal ineligible for his entire college career. So the NCAA's IARP actually conducted a review that led to LSU to self-impose vacating all 37 wins from 2012 to 2015. So now for Les Miles, you have to have a career winning percentage of .600 to be eligible for the College Football Hall of Fame. Les Miles, before the vacating of wins, I guess the wins technically are on vacation, but he was 145 and 73, which was .665. He is now 108 and 73.597. So very short of the threshold, which means he is now below it, and he is no longer eligible for the College Football Hall of Fame. So that sucks, but I mean, it is what it is. Vacating wins is also stupid, but I mean, it took you a decade to do this. NCAA, good job. Very, very hard work there. But yeah, just to throw something fun in here, LSU now has the most vacated wins of all time with 37, passing Ole Miss's 33. So good job, LSU, on that. All right, now let's get into my 5 under-the-radar games for 2023. One's earlier in the year. This one is earlier in the year. It's the same week as Alabama and Texas, and Deion Sanders will be having his home debut as well that week. So this is one that I think college football diehards know about, but not necessarily everyone's paying attention to. Oregon at Texas Tech. You got to think Oregon's coming in, Pac-12 championship aspirations, college football expectations for them, maybe, however they feel. And then for Texas Tech, this is a team that gained respect last year. Like I said, Joey McGuire is nailing it in Lubbock right now. They beat Texas and Oklahoma, I think, for the first time in school history last year. And you get this big national brand program coming into your house earlier in the year. Could spell trouble, but I think Oregon will probably win this one. But still, this is one you need to pay attention to. This could be great. Now, the next one I want to talk about is Ole Miss at Tulane. Yes, Ole Miss is going to Tulane. The Cotton Bowl champions beat USC in the Cotton Bowl last year. Conference champions, possibly the best Group of 5 team again this year. Returning head coach, returning quarterback Pratt, who's a stud. I mean, for this is big because if Ole Miss loses with the way their schedule plays out, in the SEC is brutal, like just LSU, Alabama, Georgia, and then on top of that, just other SEC games. So if you drop this game, it could be a bad year in Oxford. But, I mean, you winning this game is also big as well. It's not like, this isn't a win we don't gain anything. You beat an elite Group of 5 team at their place. I think that's great for your resume. So for them, it sets them up to keep building, and then for Tulane, with them coming in, you're looking to build off the best turnaround in college football history. You're looking to rebuild this program that was a great program long time ago. But still, you can propel yourself forward and hope for another New Year's Six bowl bid, because I don't know. I mean, maybe if you went undefeated and had a good win against Ole Miss, you could make the playoff if things happen, but I see this as another New Year's Six bowl year, 12-team playoff next year, then we can start talking. But this is huge for them to build their resume, and like I said, even if they keep it a respectable game and keep it close, that's big for them for the New Year's Six bowl. It goes to the highest ranked Group of 5 team, and a close game with Ole Miss, depending on how Ole Miss finishes later in the year. I think this is a great opportunity for them to showcase their brand for recruiting as well, especially for some in-state kids. Like, why not come to Tulane? Why not build a legacy? Why not help restart this program that we already kickstarted last year, but build it even more? I mean, this is a huge platform for you to broadcast Tulane and what Tulane is about, and I'd love to see them come back in this modern era and sell the vision for the future of this program. So that's a good one. Next one, keeping it Louisiana. I know this is a rivalry game, so I guess it's not necessarily under the radar for these fan bases, but it's the reason I have it under the radar, it's the same week as Florida State at Clemson and Ohio State at Notre Dame. It's Arkansas at LSU. I mean, this game's going to get swept under the rug a little bit just because people will be paying attention to all the national brands going crazy, which LSU's a national brand as well, but you know what I mean. Outside of 2019, the past few matchups have been close, including last year. LSU won by 3. The Hogs are up a little bit of question this year. Their run game's going to be absolutely insane. They're going to need people to step up at receiver, but never question the Hogs when they're in a game against the Tigers. I know sometimes it can get brutal, but when they show up to play, these games can be as entertaining as any other football game you will watch all season. So, keep an eye out, Arkansas, LSU. Next, we move on to Utah at Oregon State. This one is actually on a Friday, and I think this early season showdown actually sets up a lot for the Pac-12. You have Utah looking to three-peat. Oregon State won 10 games last year in their first bowl win since 2013. I mean, you got a rising program, and you have Utah, who's always overlooked, and every year look to prove themselves to everyone who forgets about them, and they always prove themselves. But you're going to Oregon State, to Corvallis, against a surging team who has, life for the first time in, almost 2 decades. That was their first 10-win season since 2006, I believe. So this will be tough. I mean, Utah killed them last year, so that also gives Oregon State a little fire going into this game. But this will be a damn good football game, and it'll be on Friday. This game will probably be at 10 or 11 o'clock my time, but I'll be staying up to watch it. I can promise you that. Keep your eye out, Utah at Oregon State. That will be a fun football game. Lastly, we move on to, yes, I know you're looking at this saying under the radar, Alabama at Texas A&M. Do you realize you're saying Alabama and Texas A&M are under the radar? Yes. I think this game is kind of being forgotten about in the grand scheme of things when people are talking about bigger games on the year, which is why I have it under the radar. It's not in my top games, my top 5 per se, but I would consider it a top 10 game of the year. I just think people are forgetting it because all the games over the schedule, like I said, but also because of Texas A&M last year. I don't see it going as crazy as it was last year for A&M. I think the train will be back on the tracks a little bit. I'm not promising SEC title or playoff spot, but when Bama went to A&M last time, it was tough. Last year, TAMU had Bama on the ropes and almost beat them. They got that 4th down fiasco at the end. I mean, this is going to be a great game. Texas A&M plays Bama well. Jimbo has done that, and he's kind of getting his feel against Saban. He got one of those wins, and you're going to College Station, especially if they turn it around a little bit this year. This could be a hyped game by the time it comes around. So that one, pay attention to that one. So now let's move on to my top 5 games for 2023. I kind of cheated here. I have technically 6, but within that 6, multiple teams. It's just there's 2 scenarios that I couldn't leave out. So obviously first, LSU, Florida State. Huge game to kick off the year. This is very big for LSU. At first I was thinking maybe this is more important. Obviously it's important for both teams. But Florida State, the only other team I realistically see competing with them on their schedule is Clemson, and you can technically play them again. So that I can see where Florida State could lose this game and afford a loss and get revenge for that loss. We're talking college football playoff possibilities here. But for LSU, you lose this game, there's no going back or getting to play Florida State again. Obviously, Florida State can't play LSU again, but LSU has a lot more people on their schedule that are going to be able to challenge them in football games. So I think this is more important for LSU to win this game if we're looking for playoff possibilities just because the way their schedule is. But this game is going to be wild in Orlando. If it's anything like it was last year, boy, we are in for a ride. Next, Georgia at Tennessee. Obviously, last year that game was so hyped, and then Tennessee went in and just became a shell of its former, just a shell of its former self, just flat. It was absolutely terrible. But this year, you're going into Neyland. That environment is going to be insane. Just remember the Bama game last year for Tennessee and Neyland. It'll be just like that for the Georgia game, especially if Tennessee and Joe Milton are cooking and you're looking at a possibility of potential for the SEC East being on the line. Grab your popcorn and, I guess, mustard bottles, beer cans, and whatever else you want to throw at opposing head coaches, Vols fans. But that game will be great. Next, Texas at Alabama, obviously. It's Texas and Alabama. Those two uniforms going on the field at the same time against each other is almost peak college football, basically. It doesn't get any better than on-campus games against high premier blue blood programs. Texas at Alabama, Texas last year, viewers don't get hurt. Texas probably would have won that game, which Texas has sadly had to say that about Alabama a lot with Colt McCoy. But this year, you get to go into Bryant-Denny and prove yourself. A lot of expectations around Sark, year 3. You got a veteran quarterback now. You got weapons everywhere. And then Bama, a lot of questions. This is earlier in the year. If Bama beats Texas, Bama's still going to beat Bama. But there's a lot more question marks around them than there normally is. But this game will say a lot for both teams. And if Texas wins this game, oh boy. If you ever thought Texas is back after the Texas beat Notre Dame a few years ago, or just any other online banter, if Texas goes in to Tuscaloosa and beats Bama and Bryant-Denny, you won't be able to go a single minute without someone talking about Texas is back on any platform anywhere. So, great game going on. Also, keeping another Texas game for my top games. Kansas State at Texas. Yes, Kansas State at Texas is one of the top games of the season. I believe that because I think this has Big 12 title implications. Obviously, the two best teams go, and these are my preseason picks for the Big 12 title, is Texas and Kansas State. So I think this will determine, obviously it's at Texas, but I think this determines who the better squad is going through. It could be kind of like last year when you saw Kansas State upset TCU in the Big 12 title. Kansas State is always that team they're kind of like Utah. They always get undermined. They always get talked about, but then forgotten about, and then they don't get talked about again until a performance they have, which they usually put on each year. But Kansas State at Texas, that's going to be a hard-nosed football team against a high-flying theatrics Sark offense. So that's premier football. Sign me up. Next, this is a trio. So Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan all play each other. So I couldn't not just pick one of those games. So Penn State goes to Ohio State, Michigan State goes to Penn State, and Ohio State is at Michigan. It's literally a Big Ten East mini playoff for those teams this year. I think Michigan wins the East. I hate counting Ohio State out because it's Ohio State and they have ran that conference, but I think this really is the year for Penn State if they want to take that next step, not necessarily winning the East. And the divisions going away is great for them because I think right now they're setting up for their best football in the James Franklin era. But I think right now they could have their best season in the James Franklin era. I think they have a serious shot at the Big Ten title. And even if they barely miss out, I think they could go 10-2, 11-1. You could see them in a situation where they're sitting outside the college football playoff, sitting at 5, hoping for a team to lose or something of that situation. But I think these three games of all the three teams against each other will be absolutely insane. And same goes for this next one. Oregon, Washington, and USC. It's another mini playoff within a conference. You got all these teams playing each other, all three of the favorites. Oregon at Washington, USC at Oregon, Washington at USC. these games are going to be insane. And for USC, these games are pretty close together. So, and they're also sandwiched in when they play Notre Dame and Utah as well. So USC really doesn't have much break going into these games against these teams. And Washington plays Oregon and Utah within the last 3 or 4 weeks as well, I believe. So there's going to be a lot known about the Pac-12 through that stretch. And not only that, but there will be a few upsets in that conference. But those will be games that you have to keep on your radar. I know that's more than 5, but I had to highlight those. All right, most overhyped teams for 2023, I got TCU and North Carolina. TCU, lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place. You had your shot at the national championship. I think it was the best shot you were going to have. I know the 12-team playoffs coming down the road, and I think Sonny Dykes will have them operating back to their early 2010s, late 2000s TCU form. But I just think for a school like TCU, your best chance to winning a national championship is actually in a 4-team playoff, not a 12-team playoff. If you can see what I'm saying from that, just you'll play more elite teams through that kind of playoff compared to this. Obviously, for a school like that, it's a lot harder. But you had your chance. You just had to run up against Georgia, which sucks. I know. You go up against Georgia and their dynasty. It's just how it was. But I think I think the fan base kind of thinks that they will almost be back to where they were last year, which is a little bit of a wishful thinking. I think thinking about a Big 12 title should be as far as you could go. Not even a Big 12 title, but just making it. I know the quarterback situation, you're technically returning your starter. Who would have been your starter last year? Let's be real. Last year was lightning in a bottle year, so many close games. I'm expecting an 8-4, 7-5 season at a TCU. Probably finish 4th in the Big 12, for being maybe even 5th, depending on how it plays out. That conference is very hard to predict. But just for them, I think the league's too deep. There's too much going on, and the recoil from last year is going to be tough. I hate saying this about them just because I like TCU and I like Sonny Dykes, and they're just a fun school. They're a fun school to root for. They've always been the little engine that could, so I hate saying that about them. But TCU, no hate, just I think this year, it's not saying for the future of your program, I think this was your best chance to win a natty, but I think y'all be operating at a higher level with Dykes. He's killing it in recruiting. He's a great football coach. But this year, let's set our expectations back a little bit. It's going to be a little bit of a hangover season, but not a bad season. But next, I got North Carolina. The Tar Heels obviously have Drake May, who's a stud. But the problem is Drake May doesn't play all the other 21 positions on the football field. So, I mean, they get a ton of love and praise. I don't see them being better than like an 8-4 football team. They did the same thing when they had Sam Howell. All the hype around Sam Howell. See the number 1 pick in the draft. Oh my God. And just flat face. Mac Brown, North Carolina does the same thing every year. Don't question it. You think it's going to change. It doesn't change. It's a recurring cycle. They have... their O-line is not that great. And they probably have one of the worst defenses in the ACC. So I don't think they won't be... They could possibly, I guess, put them in the dark horse category for the ACC title, but don't think anything past that for North Carolina. All right, now let's move on. UGA making history. What do I mean by this? All right, so if Georgia can win a 3rd straight national title, they'll make history. You want to talk about dynasties in the past. I mean, you got to remember the old Oklahoma teams back in the day, the old Miami teams, 80s, 90s. You even have Nebraska, the former years, when they were a blue blood. You have Alabama, USC, all their national championships. But one thing those schools never did was do the three-peat. None of them three-peated. Only one school has ever three-peated, and I'll give you a second to think about it. Lock your guess in. I bet you will be wrong, because you're going to throw out like Ohio State or Michigan or something. Keeping it in the Big Ten. Minnesota, 3 straight national championships in 1934, 1935, and 1936. So it's crazy to think all these dynasties we've seen in the history of college football, no one's done the three-peat besides the Golden Gophers since 1900. Obviously, you have before 1900 when there were like 12 football teams playing. Back in the days, Harvard or Princeton, whatever, won 20 national championships, but there was 5 teams. all that. But there's a lot for Georgia this year. They have a real chance to join Minnesota this season. There's still a lot up in the air. College football can always be unpredictable. It's just a machine that you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what it's going to crank out each year. But, I mean, as we know, good luck for Georgia. You have a chance to join very elite company and be technically the first modern football team to actually do so. So, Georgia, it's up to you this year. Can you join that company? Now let's move on to Power 5 conference rankings. I just wanted to throw this in here just because for me, there's a question at 2. What do you prefer? Do you prefer quantity or quality? Because you can kind of get into both when we talk at number 2. Obviously, for me, number 1 is the SEC. I mean, Georgia, Bama, LSU, all 3 are in their top 5 of the FPI per ESPN. I mean, they're elite. They're damn good football teams. And you have Tennessee outside of that. You have Texas A&M, who should be able to bounce back to one of the best defenses. Ole Miss ain't a pushover no more. Lane Kiffin's got the Lane train rolling in Oxford, led by Quinshon Judkins, who's a stud. So now, when I get to 2, this is where, and obviously you think Big Ten, and I want to say Big Ten, but the Pac-12 has 6 teams with at least 8 or more on the over-under in win totals. That's 6 teams with 8 or more on the over-under for win totals. That is quantity. Now, do I think a lot of these teams I could see one slipping through into a national championship win if there was an upset on the other side of the 4-team bracket. But that would have to be like USC or Oregon. But I mean, you got to think there's 6 teams that realistically, I mean, I think the Pac-12, what I think is the Pac-12 is going to be the Big 12 last year. The Big 12 just ate itself alive. TCU made it through a bunch of close games. I mean, sometimes the ball goes that way and that luck works for you, but that doesn't work every year. Last year, I mean, you got to think for the Pac-12, it's going to eat itself alive. I don't see a single team going undefeated, but with how good all the teams are going to be, I think there will be able to have the Pac-12 will be able to have a team that's not undefeated make the college football playoff. So for me, I'm going to put them at 2. I know it's questionable and it's West Coast football, but this is the best the Pac-12 has been in a long time. And that's wild to say considering we don't necessarily know the future of the conference. But there's a lot of quality in the Pac-12, or quantity in the Pac-12, but there's also a lot of quality. And the Big Ten is just too top-heavy for me. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and then Iowa's that notch under. But I don't see much you can say Wisconsin, but honestly, first-year head coach with Fickle, I just don't want to overplace expectations. This is just for this year, by the way. This isn't future. This is strictly for 2023 going into the season. But I got Big 10 at 3. Big 12 is scrambled, like I said. They got a lot of depth, but there's no, unless Texas emerges, I don't see any truly elite team. So I got them at 4. But they can still surprise. There's tough football played in the Big 12. And then at 5, obviously, I got the ACC. It's about as top-heavy goes outside of Florida State and Clemson. I mean, the ACC has just kind of been this way for the past decade now, but the depth continues to be a problem for the ACC. But that is my rankings: SEC, Big 10, or SEC, Pac-12, Big 10, Big 12, ACC for 2023. Now, speaking of Power 5 conferences and Big 12, who will be the new Big 12 power or powers? So you got a lot of teams joining in the Big 12 this year. UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, BYU. Now I'm trying to think realistically who can take over this conference. What 2 programs or 1 program can take this over? Who's going to be the new Texas? Who's going to be the new Oklahoma? And there's a few schools that came up that have that actual chance. One for me, obviously, being Kansas State. Chris Kleiman, one of the most underrated head coaches in college football. He's literally, success is all he knows. He dominated with winning football at North Dakota State, and now he's got 3 8+ win seasons at Kansas State and a 10-win season with a Big 12 title. So he could set up K-State to be the perfect heir to the throne. I mean, they could, and especially if they compete and win again this year, and let's say they're coming off back-to-back Big 12 titles back-to-back Big 12 titles with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. You set up perfectly for that to be your conference. Kansas State has a serious shot at being the new heir to the throne. Now, one I want to throw in here as well is Texas Tech. Joey McGuire, like we talked about earlier, he seems to get it going. He's winning football games with less talent. He's coaching them well. They're playing serious football in Lubbock. And if last season is any indication of the future, the Red Raiders are in great hands with Joey McGuire. Now, I don't know how I feel about this, but I have BYU maybe. I mean, you got to think BYU's always played good schedules. They'd been independent very, very long time. They've never shied away from competition. BYU's never been scared to go play anybody. And I think, and they've always had good trenches. They've always had great trenches, and I think that will help them transition into the Big 12 easier. Will it help them take it over? I don't know, because we're going to have, for BYU, they're going to have to get better at those elite skill positions that they really have lacked at kind of recently. I guess past 2 years you had Zach Wilson, but I mean, that year also they had with Zach Wilson, their schedule wasn't as great as it normally is. But if adding with them being in the Big 12 now, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving, BYU will actually be one of only 3 schools in the Big 12 that has a national championship, and they'll actually have the most recent national championship, which was 1984. And no, UCF, your Disney World national championship does not exist. So the other 2 teams with national championships are TCU in 1935-1938 and Oklahoma State in 1945. So, speaking of that, Oklahoma State, I think they can always contend, especially with Texas and Oklahoma out, for the Big 12 as long as Gundy is there. He's only had 1 losing season, and that was his first year in 2005. As long as he's there, like I said, I think they'll be in the upper echelon of the Big 12. Oklahoma State will always be a power there without those 2 schools. And then I kind of want to talk Dave Aranda at Baylor. Can he actually stabilize Baylor into a power? Baylor's been, they had the early, with the RG3 days and the Art Briles days, where it was up, and then obviously all the stuff that went on with that, don't want to get into it, but down. And then with Aranda, they had a Big 12 title, and then they went back down last year. It's just flip-flop, flip-flop. So can he stabilize Baylor? Can you keep them contending and gradually get better year over year? That's something that we've seen almost done correctly at Baylor. And then obviously the thing, like I said, but with Aranda, it looked like it. So this year is a big prove-it year, especially with the 2 schools leaving. I think they have a chance, or we find out whether or not Dave Aranda's year at Baylor was a flash in the pan. And then obviously Sonny Dykes at TCU, incredible football coach, great recruiter. And obviously last year, if it's an indication of anything, like I said, with Texas Tech, TCU, great hands. But I think TCU for sure will be up there. And in my opinion, it's going to be Kansas State and TCU who will be taking over the Big 12 going forward once Texas and Oklahoma leave. But there's one that I can't not talk about just because I'm an Auburn fan, but I just want to throw this out there. I wouldn't necessarily say they would be powers in the Big 12, but you got to think about UCF. You got Gus Malzahn, who coached at Auburn and coached tough schedules year in and year out. He's got Florida to recruit from, and he's now in a Power 5 conference. UCF can become a serious threat. The reason I'm not saying them now is because I think this would take form over time. In about a decade or so, you could see UCF being up there in top 3 teams of the Big 12. Easily, no problem, depending on how the future of college football looks like, because now you can't think 3 days ahead without something changing in this world. Thank y'all for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment. You want me to talk about your team? Anything else? I'll talk about it. Leave me a comment. I'll get on it. But what we do, college football today, college football tomorrow, college football all the time. Thank you for tuning in, spending some time with me. I enjoyed talking college football. I hope you have a great rest of your week.